what you can say and what you can't say in the state budget.
Yeah, so Wisconsin is different than many states in the sense that the state passes an operating budget and a capital budget every 2 years. So when we talk about the state budget, we're talking about how lawmakers in Madison and the governor are planning to spend your $100 billion roughly over the next 2 years as the taxpayer. And so the Joint Finance Committee had what was its first working meeting last week. They met for about 2 hours, and they did something similar to they've done the last three budgets proposed by Governor Tony Evers, which is they pretty much went Command A, delete, and strip it down to the very, very bare bones. So, that's what they did. We've seen this before. Something that is not totally unique, but they have started to push more, is that they kind of do that in two parts. The first part they do is to delete, in this instance, it was several hundred provisions that the governor proposed, basically for good. The motion that they talk about, it says list of items to be removed from budget consideration. What that means is don't bring it up, don't talk about it. It's dead. We're not going to think about it for the budget. So they did that in one piece, and then in another piece, they deleted the rest of it, though some of those ideas could come back up. So it's kind of a two halves. You can see what they got rid of for good, and you can see what they might consider over the next couple of months as they finish crafting the budget.
So am I correct in saying what they're putting out here, and this applies not just for people that might testify, but like sitting state senators and representatives, particularly from the Democratic Party, do not talk about these things or we'll cut off your mic because they're hitherto gone.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right.
We're joined here at the desk now. We hope to be every week from someone at Wisconsin Watch, and Jack Kelly is in. Jack, how the heck are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me again.
It's always a pleasure. We were talking mushrooms before we came back on the air, but morel mushrooms. And then one of our listeners, Cameron Appleton, texted at me right before I went on the air and said, "Please teach me about mushrooms. I wish to grow them." And I'm not entirely sure which type of mushrooms he's talking about.
I don't know how to provide any advice either.
Yeah, I don't either.
I like mushrooms. I like to eat them.
Are you a morel fan?
I am. I'm not picky and choosy.
Really?
Eating mushrooms is an adult era innovation for me. I was like 25 years old when I started doing it again. So
Yeah.
I was like, mushrooms on pizza, whatever, never my thing. Now I can't get enough of it.
That's fantastic. I grew up on morels as a kid, but they're pricey now. I saw not on Saturday, but Wednesday here downtown, $25 a pound.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Wow.
They're the elusive morel mushroom, but of course the capital morel mushrooms in Southwest Wisconsin, Muscatine.
All right.
Yeah. You said there was a place in Rothschild that claims this or whatever?
Oh, no, in Rothschild is where the state Republican Party convention is going to be this weekend.
There may be a lot of mushrooms imbibed in Rothschild, Wisconsin. All right, well, this is enough of Old Mushroom Home Week. Anyway, what Jack is here to do, and the great folks at wisconsinwatch.org, that's wisconsinwatch.org, keep track of what the happenings are in the state of Wisconsin. It's a great website. You do a great newsletter. I wanted to pick up a little bit, Jack. We had State Senator Keller Royce here earlier in the show, Democrat for the Madison area, and she's on the Joint Finance Committee. But what I wanted to pick up, our friend and colleague Jane McNair touched on this morning on her show. And for our afternoon listeners, talk a little bit about this Joint Finance budget and the oddness, I'll call it, or uniqueness of this time around. They've done something different in terms of what you can say and what you can't say in the state budget.
Yeah, so Wisconsin is different than many states in the sense that the state passes an operating budget and a capital budget every 2 years. So when we talk about the state budget, we're talking about how lawmakers in Madison and the governor are planning to spend your $100 billion roughly over the next 2 years as the taxpayer. And so the Joint Finance Committee had what was its first working meeting last week. They met for about 2 hours, and they did something similar to they've done the last three budgets proposed by Governor Tony Evers, which is they pretty much went Command A, delete, and strip it down to the very, very bare bones. So, that's what they did. We've seen this before. Something that is not totally unique, but they have started to push more, is that they kind of do that in two parts. The first part they do is to delete, in this instance, it was several hundred provisions that the governor proposed, basically for good. The motion that they talk about, it says list of items to be removed from budget consideration. What that means is don't bring it up, don't talk about it. It's dead. We're not going to think about it for the budget. So they did that in one piece, and then in another piece, they deleted the rest of it, though some of those ideas could come back up. So it's kind of a two halves. You can see what they got rid of for good, and you can see what they might consider over the next couple of months as they finish crafting the budget.
So am I correct in saying what they're putting out here, and this applies not just for people that might testify, but like sitting state senators and representatives, particularly from the Democratic Party, do not talk about these things or we'll cut off your mic because they're hitherto gone.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I think State Senator Roy's experienced this last session. I believe it was something about childcare that she was talking about during one of the Joint Finance Committee meetings, and they turned her mic off. And that is the case for many things, and particularly for certain ideas that the public came and told the committee at 4 different listening sessions across the state over the last kind of month in April that they really cared about it. And it was things about education funding, about healthcare and healthcare access, about childcare, et cetera. Like one of the things, for example, that they killed for good is childcare counts. People on the program might have heard that before. We've been talking about it for several years now. It's a program that the governor created using federal money. The state basically provides funds to childcare providers effectively to keep them open so that you can have, places to send your kids. And Democrats have raved about it. They've seen it as very successful. Republicans have been lukewarm at best. After they've been very against it, they have, kind of turned down the idea of making it a state-funded permanent program at every turn, and they did that again. So childcare counts, it's out. Don't bring it up again in the budget. But, for example, a big thing that the governor wants is to increase the amount of funds that are reimbursed to school districts for special education. Special education is very expensive. Many districts will tell you they have to transfer money from their general fund into that fund to help pay for special education costs. He wants to increase the reimbursement rate up to, I think, 60%. The state will cover 60% of special ed costs for all districts in the state. Republicans took that provision out, but they didn't kill it for good. So we could see a version of that come back in the budget bill.
We're talking to Jack Kelly of Wisconsin Watch. You can find all these stories at wisconsinwatch.org. Jack, it just seems on the first one of those things you mentioned there, on the child care, and today I guess is the National Day of Child Care, whatever they're calling it, where to bring awareness to this very important subject. We talked about it last week with Corrine, who has a child care facility in beautiful New Glarus, Wisconsin. Incidentally, I was at Bailey's Run in New Glarus over the weekend. Beautiful place to have a beverage and a piece of a wonderful meal. But in order for people in that community, New Glarus, to work, they need places to have their kids and child care. To this very serious point that you're bringing up, why on you're here to report, not but I guess I would say, as a guy who analyzes the news, it just seems confounding to me that a current state senator or representative would say we're not even going to allow a discussion on childcare in this particular, and this is going to mean that childcare workers go out of business and some people no longer have a place to leave their kids, which means they won't be able to go to work, which means they'll be unemployed. And then those same people that said we're not talking about this will point the finger back and say, well, you're lazy.
It's an interesting dynamic, right? I mean, just a couple of weeks ago, Assembly Republicans advanced a whole package of bills about bolstering the state's workforce. Democrats come right back to them and say, if you want to bolster the state's workforce, invest in childcare. I will say, Republicans on the committee kind of panned the idea that because they were throwing out childcare counts, nothing's going to get done on childcare, right? Howard Markline, Senator Howard Markline, he's the committee co-chair he's a Republican from Spring Green, in the greater Madison area. He said during the committee, this idea that the door is closed on all of these things is pretty ridiculous. And his committee co-chair, Representative Mark Bourne from Beaver Dam, kind of piled onto that, and he said, there is more than one way to address issues, and those will all be debated and built over the next couple of months. So what they're saying is just because we don't want to do it the way the governor wants to do it, doesn't mean we're not going to do it at all. And so, now we kind of wait and see as they go behind closed doors, strike deals, and really, make the sausage of the spending plan for the next kind of 2 months, right? The fiscal year for the state runs out on June 30th. There's, it's kind of a soft deadline. If they don't pass a budget, we don't have like a state government shutdown. Funding levels just continue as is. But, there's some pressure. People typically like to be done with the budget by or shortly after the 4th of July. And with the 4th of July being a Friday this year, I think lawmakers will probably be eager to meet the deadline.
I think you're absolutely right. And I don't mean to harp on this too much because we talked about Senator Mark Lyon in the first hour, a guy I happen to know from my days in the Capitol. And I would take Senator Mark Lyon at his word in what's in your article, saying that what's the word he used? It's ridiculous to say they're not going to address childcare. Is that right? I'll make sure I get it right.
The idea that the door is closed and all these things is pretty ridiculous.
So Howard says the idea that the door is closed is quote unquote pretty ridiculous. This is the same guy who a couple of years ago, I was at a town hall, 100 plus people packed in a room trying to save the UW Richland campus and asking Howard and asking Representative Kurtz, who both sat on the Joint Finance Committee then as well, saying, how can we get money? We need like maybe $3 or $4 million to keep this campus open. And Howard literally looked at people and said, quote, I don't know. I don't have any power. I don't really have any real power. That's what he told people. And here's a guy who is one of the most powerful legislators in the state.
Most definitely.
And so my point is, when we come back to this, what's in this story at Wisconsin Watch, when he says, well, this is ridiculous. How should voters take this guy at his word when he clearly hasn't been serious in the past?
It's interesting. And, obviously this is on its face a policy discussion, right? We're talking about the state budget. It is by no means the sexiest thing.
No, you use the right term, sausage making.
But there's always politics to it as well, right? Howard Markline was drawn into a different district.
More Democratic leaning.
Right, and is probably the most vulnerable, or certainly one of the two most vulnerable Senate Republicans, and Democrats will be eager to win his seat come in 26 because they see it as the path to taking the majority in the Senate. And so here you have Senator Markline. He is in a position of power. As you pointed out, the Joint Finance Committee is the most powerful legislative committee. Oftentimes you'll see journalists call it the powerful budget writing committee, et cetera. We'll see how he uses that to maybe soften himself on certain stances that maybe he's been opposed to in the past. Now that he's going to be in a district that's probably going to be a real dogfight.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, because sometimes I'm as my teacher used to say, too poor to pay attention. Ken Lewis, by the way. There's a fundraiser tonight. Speaking of Tony Kurtz, there's a fundraiser tonight at 5:00. Wasn't that supposed to be at one time illegal for a sitting state legislator to fundraise during a joint finance session?
Gosh,
or do I have that? Did I just dream that?
I would have to ask a legal expert. I'm not sure on that one.
I mean, there was talk at one point years ago in the state legislature to say maybe while the guy and the gal who are writing the budget, maybe they shouldn't be accepting money at the same time from supporters. That might be a bad idea. Kind of like giving a $400 million plane to a president.
Things maybe are blurry, but I would have to ask an attorney for sure.
All right. I didn't mean to throw. That baffles me. I do a lot of the guy's name.
I do a lot of reporting on legal issues, but every time I talk to an attorney, I have to start up front with the I have to couch it. I have to qualify it. I am not an attorney.
But Jack Kelly is a strong name if you were an attorney. I mean, it's a strong name anyway. But I mean, the law firm of Jack Kelly. Call Jack Kelly. One call. No, that's already been done. All right. Well, we're talking with Jack Kelly at Wisconsin Watch. Anything else on joint finance or the budget before we leave that?
I mean, I just think it's going to be really interesting. One thing that I want to lift up that could be a backdoor to get Wisconsin on par with 48 other states is that they left the door open to expand Medicaid, like postpartum Medicaid expansion for new moms to up to a year. I should note, every Republican senator on the committee, including the co-chair, Howard Markline, just voted for that as a standalone bill. And now I would be interested to see if they would back a motion to put it in the state budget, because that would be a way to circumvent the leading opposition to the bill Assembly Speaker Robin Voss, who, of course, without his say, without his approval, no bill in the Assembly gets a vote. So would they be willing to put that into the budget to kind of circumvent Voss? Because seems unlikely to me he would spike the whole budget bill over that.
Do you think, there's been some different reporting you're reporting, do you think in the state Senate that they're going to need Republican votes or Democratic votes to pass it?
Maybe.
Maybe. There you go. All right, sounds good. Oh, I come back and my old party is meeting with mushrooms. Maybe. We'll come back and talk more about the Republican Party convention. Could the Shim Sham Man be on the way out? We'll ask Jack Kelly. It's the Town Hall Ball Show on the Civic Media Radio Network. Jack Kelly of Wisconsin Watch is here to talk a little politics. My former party, the State Republican Party of Wisconsin, they are having their state convention coming up. Jack, it could get a little spicy.
It could. This is the first time that they will have gathered for the state party convention since Donald Trump's triumph and return to the White House, but also what can only be described as an absolute shellacking in the April state Supreme Court race, which, when you really consider what's going to have a more profound effect on your life as a Wisconsin resident, was probably the one that they maybe would have wanted to win more. Right. So it is going to be interesting for sure. And I think, there's been a lot of online chatter, especially from, the Republican Party of Wisconsin is so interesting, right? They have for a long time relied on the work of volunteers. They've been very reliant upon the grassroots for donations, et cetera, to fuel the party. The State Democratic Party is not that way. They have raised just unbelievable amounts of money. They have a full-time year-round professional staff. They approach things differently. And some of the Republican faithful, that those grassroots volunteers who are the lifeblood of the party, are dissatisfied with state GOP chairman Brian Schimming. And so it'll be interesting to see if that gets fiery this weekend up in Rothschild.
Now, I've known Brian Arthur Schimming, that's his full name, the state party chair, for a long time. And he comes from more of the, I'll call it the old traditional line of Republican politics. He's adapted to the MAGA, but that's not who he really, really, really is. And now other reporting I've seen is saying that the ultra or uber MAGA part of the Wisconsin Republican Party, particularly in Milwaukee, the largest county in the state, and then Green Bay, Brown County, I believe it was Eau Claire or La Crosse, are coming together to try to vote him out. But I hear that that's kind of not possible.
It's not entirely clear.
I was never like on the big committees of the state party.
It's not entirely clear. To my knowledge, this would be kind of a novel thing. But I think it's more representative of the fact that you kind of have this, I don't know if it's a need, but you have this tendency of grassroots people in politics, both sides of the aisle, but for sure more recently in Wisconsin on the conservative side, looking for the scapegoat when something goes wrong. I think back, I was at the state party convention a couple of years ago. Democrats had just cleaned up in the 22 midterms, by and large here in Wisconsin. Of course, Ron Johnson got reelected. And I wrote a whole story. Can Republicans in Wisconsin bounce back? They sure did. And people were very confident that they could when I was there. But at that convention, there were a lot of grassroots people who were very upset with Assembly Speaker Robin Voss. Yeah. And now it seems that the focus has shifted to Brian Schimming, which is interesting to me in some ways because, sure, they get out fundraised like crazy. Right. But there's also something to the fact that Republican donors like to put their money into PACs that they can control rather than giving to a party to let it be used. Democratic donors just give money to the party and let the party go nuts. So it's really interesting because, you talk about what happened in April. Well, some things that the state Republican Party did in April, they transferred close to $10 million to Brad Schimmel's campaign. Schimming, right? To Schimmel's campaign. They were knocking doors. They were out there. They haven't been doing that. They didn't have $9 million to transfer in previous election cycles, right? They came nowhere near that investment for Dan Kelly.
And we saw that this goofballs from Arizona was the Turning Point, whatever that's called, the big Republican PAC. They were more visible in this spring election, to me, it seemed like, than the Wisconsin Republican Party.
Right, but think back to November. Did you get a Donald J. Trump for President Inc. door knocker? No. You got America PAC door knockers. You got Turning Point Action door knockers. He outsourced basically 100% of his ground game to these third-party groups. It was risky. It seemed to work for him. It was basically the same playbook in April. It's just that, again, it kind of defies all logic. many Donald Trump voters didn't show up because Donald Trump wasn't on the ballot.
And that's the thing, Jack, as we look at this Republican Party of Wisconsin convention this week, it doesn't seem like the momentum, the big mo, as George H.W. Bush called it, is transferring from Trump into state party Republican candidates.
No, and I mean, that has been the case for as long as Donald Trump has been on the political scene in earnest, going back to kind of 2015, 2016, when he really shocked the world and then took office in 2017. That's been the case, right? We haven't seen Trump voters turn out in off-year elections. We haven't seen Trump voters turn out and vote for people who are not Donald Trump. That rung true again. I think he only got 62% of Trump voters or something, this being Brad Schimmel, whereas Crawford got 77% of Kamala Harris voters. And when you consider how many fewer people voted, that adds up to a 10-point blowout.
For all those covering the Wisconsin Republican Party convention this week, hang out with Steve Knotts. He's a lot of fun at a state party convention, or so I've heard. Jack Kelly is always fun. Jack at WisconsinWatch.org. Appreciate it. You're a hell of a guy and a great reporter, and I admire you a lot. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.